It's sunny out and it's summer, and we're close to Uber Studios where I have rehearsal today, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity. It's not a static thing for me, this notion of a scene or a field or the context. It's constantly changing. What remains for me is the gravity of an event and the meaning that creates in my life, whether it is to go witness someone else's efforts in a theater or a lecture or a talk, or it is to be on stage and to be sharing what I've made. It's part of the thread of this social fabric to be called a scene. Often pretends to be something that it's not, but sometimes it is engaged in pretend. It is engaged in the questioning and the formulation of what could be, and that's really exciting. I feel connected to this city. I feel connected to a lot of the artists who are making work here. I feel responsible. I feel a part of. I very much make work in this city, and although I travel and I dislocate and and the network expands and I'm not here as much as possible, I'm definitely based here. I would like to be based here more. I feel like the scene, or at least my work, is becoming more politically conscious, and I was very, very busy when I first arrived with the politics of ecstasy, of blurring, of trance, of limit experiences, of how to move beyond the construct of a body through these physical scores and impossibilities. And I am more concerned with politics, theory, community, and so I guess it went from being very focused on myself to moving towards moving out. Yeah, I definitely think that anger is a mode, a kind of threshold, a horse that I tend to ride. Part of it is just dealing with the violence of this kind of incomprehensible state that we call the present, and just processing maybe the violence that plays out on my own body, what that kind of stress, those conflicts look like, and in a very way from a very personal place, I bring that to the stage, and approaching it from a very dark, cynical, and nihilistic place as a site to begin again in some ways, to go all the way through this death, to get dirty in this death, to be a dead clown selling death to the audience, and to reconcile with all the layers of death in order to maybe start anew, begin again. Yeah, I think it's this paradoxical place of simultaneously living and dying, no matter whether we're talking about scene or community or politics, this inherent antagonism that is, in the end, generative. And I think that would be the thing that changed in my work along the way, is kind of embracing more of this antagonism, hope, and simultaneous hopelessness in regards to making work, to living the good life. Yeah, more and more I become very interested in the balance between art and activism. And yeah, a lot of activists would say, of course, that art is bullshit, and that it has no actual impact. And I think they would also be right. Saying, and so I think, these questions of how to get out of this incestuous theoretical language within the theater, within this small community, I think those are the big questions to pose. How do we break out? How do we speak to a larger audience? How do we simplify what we're saying, and also reconcile with this incomprehensible present? How do we use theory and everything that we read in order to communicate, instead of specialize and yeah. And at the same time, I think others would say, and I also believe that creating this work is the possibility space to practice and reimagine what life could be. And what is it like to get hypersensitive with one another, to go through the body into a group and into the world, to reimagine life in the space of a theater, in the space of public performance, in a reading group, in a lecture, and to make that a practice. And I think a lot of people who are very hard up on talking about the political inefficacy of art always want to speak in terms of the event. Art and theater and dance don't change anything because they don't create the necessary disruption for change. And I think what's missing in that argument is that all events don't come out of nothing, they come out of a practice. And this work that we're doing could be the practice or the process that produces the event. And I think if we're not making work in terms of moving in that direction, then it's bourgeois, it's ineffectual, it's stupid. But what if the practice, this practice of that includes this social fabric, could lead towards the event? It's not just the artwork; it's the actual work of art that kind of brings us together. Creature Feature was a 13-part series that I put together at Basso, which was a kind of anti-gallery queer space in Kreuzberg. It's no longer happening, owned and run by Yusuf Eteman. I did it together also with Eike Wittrock. I used to organize these events in Bushwick called Studio Show, together with Miguel Gutierrez and Jonah Beaucaire. Everyone always remembers the group warm-ups from that situation, but they came about, I mean, of course, they're part of my practice because I teach a lot, and we always have to start somewhere. And I like esoteric, hippy-dippy, ridiculous warm-ups. And I guess they came about because for the first show, I think we had Angela and Jared, and we had a bunch of different performers, and people were kind of outside being cool, smoking cigarettes and drinking and talking, and they weren't really paying attention. It was like a beautiful summer day, and they weren't really paying attention to the work. And I said, we have to do something that gets us to own what we're seeing. So we did this huge group warm-up, and there were many beautiful examples. So, like, I don't know, what are the implications of a gathering? And not treat it as a just kind of typical interaction, but to get hypersensitive with each other. Yeah, we would touch each other. We would create these huge woven fabrics of bodies. On the floor, we would do esoteric hugging things, and when you mix it with the public, it's out of the theater. It's a different space. It's not even a gallery space. It's just a kind of informal space. I think it's powerful that people touch each other, that people get in close proximity to a stranger and then see something strange. I stopped because I was too busy, and I think, yeah, it's a kind of full-time endeavor for me to survive, and unfortunately, like, I can't invest in things in which I'm not paid in, and I think that's also paid for, and it's a shame, because I still desire to create those events. I think it's problematic for the scene or the field in general, is that everyone in this mode of survival needs to concentrate on their own projects, on this kind of like, and when do we actually come together?
Actually, it looks like the more we engage ourselves in the professional career, the less time we have also to be engaged in the scene or in the community. Only people who don't have opportunities to work are the ones who can invest in the community. No? It will be very sad. How can we react on that? Is it also about sometimes saying no to the professional life and, let's say,
career path? Everyone knows that freelance doesn't make you free, and that the problems with the scape of neoliberalism is that the amount of time that we spend on work is just increasing. The demands that making a piece create are massive, and yeah. So as a result, my strategies are often to engage in Uber time management, maximizing my focus, and what that means is excluding being together, hanging out, wasting time.
And don't you think that also it is connected intimately with what are the standards of professionalism, no, in our area, in our field? How much can we actually propose different ways of being choreographers, of being artists, that they don't need to be submitting constantly to the professional standards? How to also liberate a little bit more of otherness there in order to understand, yes, I'm also a choreographer and I'm not necessarily fitting into all the professional ways. How do you struggle yourself with this idea of the choreographer?
I think of myself less and less as a choreographer and more of a performer and a performance maker and a curator and a teacher. I'm still carrying that kind of postmodernist baggage of like being an individual, creating individual artworks, directing.
Besides money and the fact that we need money, what else is at stake when embarking oneself in the professional trajectory? That it is also the reason for us to also be busy with our professional trajectories, that is not exclusively money. What else do you see that is also there at stake as a form of capital value?
I mean, if I were doing it for money, I would do something else, right? So clearly I'm not doing it for the money. It is the work that puts food on my table and pays my bills. I think I'm doing it because it sustains these larger questions that I have in my life, and the practice is eventually deeply rewarding and more difficult than anything I could ever imagine, but more rewarding. It seems like there's such a coded and almost moral obligation to fulfill this kind of repertoire of works as a solo artist, and I wonder what could be if we come together and collectively reevaluate these strategies to kind of reimagine life. It's our job to reinvent, to destroy, to create new possibilities together. But I don't believe that there's a possibility to escape the killer of capitalism. I think even in your most emancipatory co-op, you're still functioning within that system. So I think to come together and work ethically, work politically, inject this kind of critical care, this political care into what we're doing, it's necessary to develop an ecology, a scene, and a field that where everyone is seen. But I think it's also important to just embrace this thing of like of the resistance that we create will eventually be subsumed, and it will become the new carrot juice. But in the moment with this configuration that we have, like how is it possible to work better and to support each other and to get away from this endless competition that breeds isolation? Because this is just repeating, and it doesn't necessarily have to. Care is of great interest to me. Not to only see care as a medical issue, but also as I get older, as a political issue, and thinking of care as a political issue then asks me to look at race, class, and gender, asks me to open up and collaborate, asks me to consider ability and inclusivity, not in a kind of paternal way or the sticky traps of like, oh, you're an exhausted subject for capital, you need to care for yourself. Actually, how to subvert those ideologies and those tendencies. I mean, we're so saturated with all of these obligations to compete, to isolate, to be productive, and how is it possible to break down this kind of mechanistic thing, and also realize that we're in that struggle together, that we're not alone in that struggle. How can we do it through the work? There are so many issues still to be worked out. How to care for and make space for all of these younger artists who are graduating to be seen within the scene. How to reconcile with what we do on a political level.